Hi there, I'm Rick Partlow. Welcome back to How to Write Science Fiction That Doesn't Suck. Sorry it's been a while. I have traveled, I have had deadlines. I just haven't been able to get back in here and record. Today I want to talk about something that's brought on by questions that I am asked frequently by people who want to get published, who have always dreamed of writing and want to get into it, or have written a few stories and they haven't been published. Nobody's bought them if they've published them independently. So they ask me, how do I know that I can be a writer? How do I know that I can actually write? And to me, this brings up a couple of different questions. And the first one is it possible to learn to be a good writer? And that's obviously yes. The answer is yes. You can learn to be a good writer. Now, the caveat to that answer, though, is you can learn to be a good writer. I'm not sure you can learn to be a great writer. And I think that's what a lot of these people mean when they say, can I learn to be a good writer? Is it possible that I can be a good writer someday? They don't mean good writer. They mean a great writer. They mean the people who you've heard their names, Stephen King, James Patterson, the people who have huge success. And I am convinced more than ever at this point in my life that being a great writer is something you're born with. Just like some people can get up in front of a bunch of strangers and talk very smoothly and give a presentation, that you'd think that they've been doing this all their life. Well, some of them have been doing it all their life, but they always were able to get up in front of people and be smooth and be, easy. They have that gift that they can have. I don't. I get up in front of a lot of people. I can be competent. See, that's the difference between a good writer. I can be competent. You can be a competent writer, but you can be a competent speaker, but you can't be a great one, I think, unless you were born to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is no reason to fret or lament that you'll never be a great writer. How many people are great? If everybody who tried was great, then there wouldn't be a great. It's like The Incredibles. When everybody's special, then nobody is. Well, that's the same thing with writing. If everybody could be a great writer, then Stephen King wouldn't be Stephen King. J.R. Tolkien wouldn't be J.R. Tolkien. Some people are better storytellers than others. It's true. You can get to be the best writer you can be through repetition, through practice, through reading, through craft. You can be the best, absolute best writer you can be. But if you're not meant to be a great writer, then you'll never be great. And that's not something to be that sad about. I've always felt like my job as a human being is not to be the best of everybody at something. It's to be the best that I can be. I've done a lot of things that I knew I would never be the best at. I have run marathons I knew I'd never be the best at, but I want to be the best marathon runner that was possible for me, and I think I did that. I wanted to be the best, martial artist that was possible for me, and I think I did that. I was nowhere near the best martial artist ever, or in my city or in my state or the country, but I was the best that I could be. I devoted time to it. I devoted effort to it. I practiced hard over and over and religiously just went in there, went to every class, practiced on my own. I was the best that I could be at that time in my life. It's the same thing with writing. I'm never going to be the best writer in the world, and I have no illusions that I am. I'm not the best science fiction writer. I'm not the best military science fiction writer. I'm probably not probably, that's ego, but I am definitely not the best indie military science fiction writer. But I'm the best writer that I can be at this point in my life. And I may get a little better. I'm getting towards the age where I don't know that I will get much better, maybe a little more polished. I'm a mature adult, and at some point, you can practice and get a little more polished, but at some point you're going to plateau and hit a place where you're not going to get any better. But I'm still going to keep trying. And that brings up the question of that we were talking about. Can I be a good writer? You can learn to be a good writer. Nobody is meant to be a bad writer. Some people it's going to take more effort than others. Some people it's going to take years to learn to be a good writer. But you can learn it. You can be acceptably good. It may be that becoming more than that becoming an upper tier writer, not great, but really good. It may be that you don't have the time to devote to that. And that's the other question people ask is, what can I do to learn to be a better writer? And that's what this series of videos is about. I'm trying to help I'm not trying to help the people who already know how to write and are already out there, with dozens of books, making lots of money. I'm not trying to teach them how to write better. They don't need me. They have their own sources. I'm trying to help the people who come to me and say, I write and I think it's good. I send it to other people and they don't like it. How can I be better? That's what this series is about. But I want to focus on the basic questions. How can I learn to be a better writer? And obviously one of the ways is listening to videos and reading books, about craft. But that's the way that people think that they can take a shortcut, and it is a shortcut. And that's the other thing I want to talk about in this video is if you want to be the best writer you can be, you have to read the best writers that are out there. And you have to read a lot. Someone said that it takes, I forget who it was, I could look it up, but it's not really worth the effort, 10,000 hours of practice to become a master at something. And for writing, that's true. But it also, I think that people think, I'll just write, a million words, and the first million words are garbage, and after that I'll be good. Well, you'll be better. But I think that's only half of the equation. I think that if you really want to be the best writer you can be, you need to read those million words. You need to read 10,000 hours. You need to read thousands of books. And that's the part that people want to shortcut around. They've read, books that interest them in their genre, and that's it. They think, I'm going to write like these guys. And it's good to imitate the style of one of the masters as you start out before you find your own voice. That's not a bad thing. That's not cheating. That is not plagiarism. You're not stealing their story. You're imitating their style, their process. And that is how people have learned to do things for thousands and thousands of years. You watch the people who are good at it and you imitate them. So let me say that right away. There is nothing at all wrong with reading Heinlein or Asimov or Clarke or, more recently like Peter Hamilton or John Ringo or Larry Correia or whoever, and imitating their style. That is fine. If you want to imitate their style, kind of echo their voice, there's nothing wrong with that. That is not unethical, as long as you don't steal their stories. You can't steal their plots. But if you want to imitate their voice, well, that's the sincerest form of flattery. So go for it. I mean, but you're not going to be, if you're worried about it, you're not going to be fooling people who are fans of John Ringo or Larry Correia into thinking, oh, he wrote this under another name. No, you're not that good yet. If you're imitating somebody else's style, you're not that good yet. But it's how you start out. You start out. That's how I started out. I imitated the styles of the writers that I read. And the reason I say you have to read widely is you need to get exposed to a broad range of styles, a broad range of voices, because one of those is going to work for you. There's nothing new under the sun, and that goes for writing too. You're not going to have a unique voice. As much as people may say, oh, he has a unique voice, or she has a unique voice. No, you don't. I mean, there's, what is it? 7+ billion people alive today, and all throughout history, there's been billions and billions of people alive, and a good portion of them have written something, and you're not going to be the first to write in your voice. I'm sorry to tell you, you're not unique. You are not a special snowflake. Somebody has written the way you do before. But if you read widely, if you read across genres, if you read classic literature, some of it sucks, I know. And I some of the worst moments of my life were being forced to read Great Expectations in high school. But, Dickens was of a time, and his style of writing was of a time, and you're not going to write like Charles Dickens, hopefully. But being exposed to the different ways that people have written, like Jules Verne or H.G. Wells, they all have different writing styles that are of their time. So what you need to do is you read those, and you read the modern stuff, and you see where the modern writers have taken that sort of voice and style and changed it for the current day. And it gives you more of a sense of how you might frame your writing style. I have a writing style. It has changed. That's one of the things that makes you grow as an author, is your writing style and your voice change slightly as you become more experienced. My early writing style was very much an imitation of people like Walter John Williams and William Gibson, the 80s writers, because that's when I started writing, was in the late 80s, early 90s. So I was imitating their voice. I was imitating their atmosphere. I mean, if you read my book, Birthright, well, it's not like a copy or a imitation of his world, but there's a lot of William Gibson in that. There's a lot of William Gibson. There's a lot of, and not just books, movies. There's a lot of Blade Runner in that. There's a lot of Aliens. It's just not the story, but the atmosphere, the sense of the world, the feeling of the world, the grittiness, the darkness, the dystopia. I didn't make it a pure dystopia because I always thought dystopias were unrealistic, and they're pretty much really literary devices. Even in the worst governments that have ever existed, that were, Pol Pot, and the Khmer Rouge, Hitler's Germany, Mao's China, the Cultural Revolution, horrible, horrible places, but there were people who were happy. They weren't the people who disagreed with the government, but there were people who were happy. They lived what they considered good lives. So a dystopia for one person is going to be, just normal life for somebody else. So I've never really bought into the dystopian, vibe of a lot of science fiction. But what you will have is you'll have an innate cynicism in a world. And that's what I went for in Birthright. And I got that from William Gibson, from some of Walter John Williams' stories. And as I said, Blade Runner, Aliens. A world where there's a cynicism about the future and about who runs things. And pretty much people's best hope is to get as far away from that as possible. So there is nothing wrong, to reiterate, with imitating your betters, and they are your betters. And I hate to tell you, but as good as you are, only 1 in a million of you is going to be anywhere near Walter John Williams or William Gibson or Robert Heinlein. You're not that good. And that brings up the other point. Don't worry that you're not great. Don't worry that you're not as good as the greats. You're not going to be. You are not going to be the next Robert Heinlein. I'm sorry to be the one to share that with you. The next Robert Heinlein, they're not going to be watching these videos. They're not going to be wondering, am I good? What can I do to become a good writer? They were born with it. They were born telling stories. They're writing their books at age 20, and they're not asking anybody if they're good. They may be insecure about how good the book is, but they're not putting this book out to independent presses and wondering, and then getting rejected and saying, "Oh man, am I any good?" No, the Robert Heinleins, they don't have to worry about that. People will read their stuff. The modern day William Gibsons, Williams is still alive and writing. I'm not saying he's, it's not like he's dead. But, the ones who are following in his footsteps, the ones who are as good as William Gibson, they don't have to worry about, scraping by for readers. They know. But those guys are so rare. You should not beat yourself up, in other words, that you are not the next Robert Heinlein or the next William Gibson, because there's only been a handful of those people in all the time that people have been writing science fiction. That's what people lose sight of. Most writers, the vast supermajority of writers, are nowhere near as good as those writers. The Isaac Asimov, the Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, they're the greats. They're the giants. And everybody should want to be that good. But I'm telling you, if you're not, it's nothing to beat yourself up about. I'm not. I have no illusions that I am anywhere near that good. So that brings up what your goal should be. When you ask, can I learn to be a good writer? What can I do to become a better writer? Your goal should be to be the best writer you can be. And you can become a writer that people want to read. I will say that to anybody. That's the other thing is I've seen people who I've read their stuff and they know how to tell a story. They're just mechanically clumsy or, inexperienced. And they lament and they give up and they don't want to keep going. Well, they're trying to skip steps. There's steps to becoming a good writer, the best writer you can be. And as I said, the first one is you have to read. And you have to read with a different... you have to read just period. You have to have always loved reading. I will say that right now, and without apology, without any kind of waffling, that if you don't love to read, you're not going to become a good writer. Maybe you could become like a technically proficient writer, but loving to read and having read is a prerequisite. It's not skippable. You can't go from not reading to becoming a good writer. Now, I've heard people say, "Oh, I didn't read as a kid," or "I didn't," and I can tell. I can tell you didn't read as a kid because I read your stuff, and you don't write like somebody who read. And there are far too many people who got into independent publishing to make money and who didn't read as a kid, and it shows. You cannot go into this passion. It's not, I want to say business, but this isn't a series about business. This is about the passion of writing. This is about the art of writing. You can't go into this not having read. And not just not having read, but not enjoying reading. If you don't enjoy reading, you're not going to be a good writer. I mean, some people, I hate universal sayings that say, always or never. But if you don't enjoy reading, you're not going to be a good writer. I will not back off from that. I will not give exceptions to that. There are none. You will not be a good writer unless you enjoy reading. Now, this may seem obvious to some people, but as I said, I have heard people say that, they got into writing because of this or that, but they never enjoyed reading as a kid. Yes, I know. So, let me throw that out there right now. The people who should be trying, I won't say it should be. If you make money at it, you make money at it. It's a business. But as far as the art goes, the people who have a chance to be good writers are the ones who love reading. So read widely. That's the first prerequisite. And then the craft books, the videos like this one, and the how-to, I see them all the time on YouTube. Those are, let's put it this way. If you buy a knife, all these videos, all these books are the whetstone that you can hone the knife on. But they aren't going to make the knife for you. The knife is made for you by reading and by your imagination. If you can't tell yourself stories in your head, then you're not going to be able to tell them to other people. That's the other thing. When people say, can I be a good writer? You can be an acceptable writer, someone who makes money, without a huge imagination if you get other people to give you your ideas, if you get other people to give you your scenarios. There's ghostwriters out there, and you can make a good living at that. And they are proficient writers. But unless you have the imagination to come up with something that's compelling, then you won't be the best writers you can be. You're not going to be. You may get to be a proficient writer. You may make money at it, but you're not. If you can't tell yourself stories in your head, then you are not going to be what I consider a good writer. Because good writers are good storytellers. Even writers through the years, throughout the decades, who were not mechanically proficient, they don't write well if you consider it just on their mechanics, the way they write, their structure, but they're great storytellers. Freaking Robert E. Howard. he wasn't a great writer, mechanically, but he was a storyteller. The guy could tell stories. He could tell stories to himself, and then he could go tell them to you. And he was telling stories about worlds and characters that captured the imagination. And if that's another prerequisite to being a good writer, is being able to tell yourself stories. So if you read as a kid, and if you told yourself stories, based on the stuff you read, and you had an imagination, then you can be a very good writer. You can go beyond being mechanically proficient. Okay, so to go over what we've already said, anybody can learn to be a better writer. Anybody can learn to be a very good writer if you've read and you can tell yourself stories in your head. And that may seem very limiting, but honestly, how many other people want to be writers? If you don't have stories you're telling yourself in your head you want to get out, why would you want to be a writer? To make money. But as I said, I can always tell the people who got into writing to make money. It's plain in their books. And they may have a wide readership because, honestly, there's not enough books out there in certain niches that so people will read basically anything that comes out in there, anything that's mechanically proficient, that's formatted well, that has, a coherent story, they'll read it. And you can make money, but you're making money, but you don't love it. You don't love your characters. You don't love what you do. And that shows. So that takes us to how to transform somebody who tells themselves stories in their head and has read, how to transform them into a good writer. And we go over some of the basics of that in this video series. But really, it comes down to the whole 10,000 hours thing. There's no shortcut around that. You have to write. Who was it that said, was it Heinlein said the first rule? Yeah, the first rule of writing is you have to write. Well, it's like the first rule of Fight Club. You have to, now the first rule is don't talk about Fight Club, but the third rule of Fight Club is you have to fight. And if you want to get better at writing, well, the first rule of Write Club is you have to write. It's not you don't talk about Write Club because, face it, writers talk about writing all the time. But you have to write. You may not want to show anybody else what you've written, but you have to write. And you have to write, it's the word I'm looking for. I keep thinking ubiquitously, but that's not it. You have to write prolifically. You have to just write all the time. I hear people say, "Oh, it's a myth. It's bad advice to write every day." No, it's not. Write every day. May not be writing in one book, but write something every day, because it's practice, and the more practice you get, the quicker you will become a good writer. People look at me at the first books that I put out, which is Duty, Honor, Planet, Birthright, and they're like, "Oh wow, that's so good, right off the bat." No, it wasn't right off the bat. Those weren't the first books I ever wrote. Those were the first books I ever published. I wrote my first book when I was, I've written short stories well before that. I started to try to write books when I was like 9. But the first book I ever wrote was when I was 16. It sucked. I was reading Mac Bolan and The Survivalist and all these stories with like rogue government agents and mercenaries. And I wrote a book like that, like a men's adventure from the 80s. It was horrible, And I wrote most of another survivalist type, post-nuclear war thing back in the 80s too. And that was horrible. And I also wrote what would be called a YA adventure now, though there wasn't the term YA back then. And that was horrible. And I finished 2 of those 3. And the third one, the nuclear war thing, I got to like 300 pages handwritten before I gave up on it. But that was 10,000 hours. That was 1,000,000 words. That plus the short stories I wrote, plus all the partial novels. I wrote another partial novel. If you read my book Birthright, that is about the 3rd or 4th draft of that story. And the one I started out with, totally different. It was jumbled and messed up and had like this big, huge mess of a plot. But, I knew when the time came that I wanted to write something for publication that I could use that plot, but I had to fix everything because it was, by that time, I had my 10,000 hours. I had my 1,000,000 words that I threw away, and I knew this isn't good. So those were not bad. They're not my best work because they were early and I was younger, but they're not bad because they weren't the first thing I ever did. They were, the 10th thing I ever did. And nobody will ever read the rest, not even me, because I threw away most of it. Some people say, "Oh, how could you throw it away?" Well, one thing, it's handwritten. the pages were getting messed up, and I write really, really sloppy. Now I should have been a doctor or something because my handwriting is horrible. So even if I had those books that I wrote back then, I couldn't read them, and I doubt anyone else could either. So I got that out of my system. I wrote that when I was very young. And there's a lot of people who get into writing in their 30s or 40s or 50s, and they're like, how come it's so hard? How come my books suck? Well, how many have you written? How much have you written? When did you start writing? I started writing when I was 9 or 8. I wrote my first novel when I was 16. I got a head start. And look, I wasn't a good writer until my 40s. So, if you are a good writer in your 30s, you're ahead of the game. Because it's not something you can... It's not like being an electrician where you can get somebody to teach you the basics and they're the same in every house. You do this, and you've hooked up the electrical power in the house. The rules to writing are much, much more fluid, and every house has to be a little bit different. You can't hook things up with the same, at the same place in the same box every time if people want something different each time. So to get to the point where you can give them something that's different but still the same every time takes a lot of practice. And I might have been able to get to where I am when I was in my 30s if I tried harder and hadn't given up on writing for about 10 years because I was depressed and discouraged that I couldn't get traditionally published back then. But it takes a long time. You're not going to be a good writer. I will come out and say, I don't think you're going to be close to the best writer you can be until you're at least in your 30s. Because to be the best version of writer you can be, you have to have life experience. There are young people who write great books, don't get me wrong. They're very entertaining books. They give their experience of life at where they are. But that limits their experience of people who are not in their position. So if you're writing just kids, maybe you can write a good book when you're in your teens or 20s, but to be the best writer you can be, probably going to have to be in your 30s just to get those million words out of the way, to get the reading you need to have done out of the way, and to take all that and mesh it together in your brain. So it's going to take a while. So if you're in your 40s or 50s and you think I'm just not good, well, when did you start? Earlier you start, the easier it is. And that's not to say that you can't become a good writer in your 40s or 50s. I'm just saying that if you start there, it's going to take you some time. There's no shortcuts. That's the other thing that people don't want to believe. There are no shortcuts to being a writer. You can't jump in using like a method or using a style or using a plotting software and skip all that other stuff. All these tools you see, they're good tools to have, but they aren't a replacement for what you have to do to get to this point. You have to have read and you have to have written. So if you write 10 books, 80,000 words each, and they all suck, that's 800,000 words. You still have 200,000 to go. I won't say that everything your first million words is going to suck, but what I'm saying is, if you don't put in the practice, then yes, you're going to suck, because you need to have done the writing before you learn how to write. So if you come and ask me or anybody else who's successful and say, how can I become a better writer? Well, you're right. You need to have read and you've got to write. This all seems very simple and maybe cliched, but there's a reason why cliches become cliches, because it's true. To become a good writer, you need to read people who know how to write, and then you need to try it yourself. And when I say try it, you may not like the fact that you're going to have to not throw away, but put your first few books in a drawer. And some people say, oh, the first book. No, it's not, unless it's a 1,000,000-word book, or unless you've written enough short stories. You need to realize that the first 1,000,000 words you write in fiction are not going to be that good. So don't trot out your first 2 or 3 books and say, man, this should have been better. These should have sold better. I should get more acclaim for this. No, because you're not that good. You haven't practiced. So don't think they're shortcuts. Don't think you can pop out, your second or third book and it's going to be automatically good. No, you're going to suck for the first 10,000 hours you do this, the first 1,000,000 words. Now, some people's suck is going to be better than others, and maybe you can make money off those books. There's no saying you can't. And also, there's no saying you can't take those books out of the drawer later when you become a more practiced and polished writer and fix what's wrong with them. So don't throw them away. I mean, I threw mine away, but I was a teenager when I wrote them, and they were not salvageable. But if you write something in your 30s or early 40s and it's not good, and you put it you just leave it in your computer and don't do anything with it, well, you can fix that. Because if you tell yourself stories in your head, if you're a good storyteller, which is a prerequisite, then that story is worth telling when you learn how to tell it better and more smoothly. And it might be that at some point you can fix it. When I started doing this professionally, full time, I had so many partial novels sitting in my hard drive, like 20,000 words, 40,000 words, 60,000 words. One of them was 80,000 words, I think. I took those and I fixed them and I finished them. My novel, Seeds of Gaia, which is not a bestseller or anything, but it's, a lot of people like it. That was on my hard drive for 20-some years. And I took it out when I had a break between series, and I said, I'm going to finish this. And I did. I finished it. I put it out there, and at some point maybe I'll write more books in that universe. I don't know. I'm pretty busy. But don't give up hope on the stories that you got stored away, the ones that you wrote and said, why doesn't anybody like this? Well, as you get better, you take those stories back out and you fix them and you put them out there. I mean, and some people, that's the problem that we're having. And I'm not going to come out and say that self-publishing is bad or that there should be gatekeepers. I'm not saying that that's a good idea in general. What I'm saying is that the fact that you don't have gatekeepers has discouraged some people because they put their things out on, Amazon, self-published, and nobody buys them and nobody reads them. But it's not, and they don't understand that these stories aren't ready yet, and they should have put them away and then come back and fix them. And the sad part is that a lot of these are never going to get written because they have given up. They've given up hope. I know of a couple of different people. They have series written that they're never going to finish or never going to publish because they've given up hope. But that's the part of the process. You keep writing, you keep practicing, you keep getting better. And I want to say to people who out there who've given up hope, like, I'll never be a good writer. You will be, I will say, you will be a better writer than you are now. If you keep doing it, I guarantee you'll be a better writer than you are now. Now, you may need to learn mechanics. You may need to learn plot structure. Plot structure is something you can learn by reading. And that's how I learned it. I learned it by reading so much that it came naturally because this is just how stories were told. So it's how I told myself the story in my head. So it's how I wrote. But you can learn that kind of thing. You can read books on it. But that's That's the whetstone that you're sharpening your knife on. That's not the knife. The knife has to come from reading and from practice. So people out there who have, 4 or 5 books and they put them out on Amazon, they didn't sell and nobody was interested, don't consider that a failure. Consider that practice. Because practice is the number one thing that will make you a better writer. Don't stop writing. I've said this before, and maybe this is repetitive. Maybe this whole video is repetitive of things I said before, but I think it's important enough that you need to hear it again. If you're watching this video, chances are you want to become a better writer. Chances are you want to improve yourself. And I'm telling you, assuming you've read, assuming you tell yourself stories in your head, the only way to improve yourself is not to try some shortcut or try some software. Whatever software you write on, it's not going to make a difference. Those are like organizational things. You need just to write. Whether you take a pen and paper and write on a notebook, whether you write on your phone, whether you write in Google Doc, it doesn't matter. Scrivener, Word, who cares? Write fiction. And some people think, I'm blogging. No, it's not the same thing. Write fiction. Write a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Write short stories. Write novellas. Just keep writing. And if they suck now, don't worry about it. You can go back and fix those later on when you become better at it. Don't get discouraged by the fact that what you're writing right now isn't that good. It's what you have to do to get better. Keep doing it. Keep writing. And if you never get what you consider good, you will have fun doing it. I mean, if you don't have fun writing, what the hell are you doing it for? Writing is a passion that some people are lucky enough to make money at. Those are the people who their books will be remembered, their books will be reread. People who get out there and write just for the money, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying it's unethical. I'm not saying that at all. I'm very much a capitalist. If you can make money at it, then go for it. But what I am saying is those people you can tell, and they're not going to be remembered, and nobody's going to read their books in 20 years. If you want to be someone whose books are read in 20 years, you have to love what you're doing. And if you love writing, then that's its own reward. It doesn't matter if you make $1. It doesn't matter if you ever get an agent or sell a book to a publisher, or if you become number 1 on Amazon, self-publish. None of that matters. You write because you love to write. You love to tell stories. Now, I will say this, and this is going to be counter to what some people say. Don't spend money on it. Don't spend any money on it until you're a good writer. Don't go out there and hire a $2,000 editor and pay $1,000 for a cover and a few $100s for formatting until you're a good writer. You're wasting money. You're discouraging yourself from pursuing what you love by throwing money at it and expecting to get that back. Now, you can buy a great cover if that makes you happy and if you have spare money, even if you're not a good writer, even if you aren't selling. If it makes you happy, and as long as you understand, you're not going to make your money back out of that until you're a better writer. You can throw money at ads and maybe sell a few copies of your book, and come out ahead. But honestly, my advice is until you become a writer on a level where you're comfortable with, don't throw money at your work. That first 2 or 3 books, don't throw money at them. If you get to the point where you think you're ready to put them out there, then put them out there. Get some feedback, but don't throw money at anything. And that's not what this series is about. It's not about marketing. It's not about money. But that's my piece of advice to you. If you're self-publishing your work, and you are like 2 or 3 books in, don't throw money at them. You may think I'm a businessman. Well, you're a businessman, then you're watching the wrong video. If you're a writer, if you're in this because you love writing, don't throw money at your first few books. Not because you can't make money that way, but because if you don't make money on those first couple books, you're going to get discouraged. You're going to stop writing. Wait until you write work that people read it and they give you great reviews, and not just a review like, when people start raving about your work, then you start thinking about, okay, maybe I've reached the level of good enough. And not the best you'll be, but good enough to start investing, to start thinking about either investing in your own publishing or bringing it to another publisher or trying to get an agent. The next level, the next step. And if you never reach that area, you'll still have done something you loved and enjoy. I'm an outdoor photographer. I do wildlife photography. I've never made any money at that. I mean, I've sold a few prints, but I've spent so much money on it because you can't do wildlife photography cheaply. Let me tell you that right now. But I've never made any money on it, and I don't care. I came to that conclusion early on in my passion for wildlife photography that I didn't want to be a professional at it because it would put pressure on me to make money, and I would feel that if I didn't make money, I was wasting my time and I should stop doing it. And I love wildlife photography and I don't want to stop doing it, so I'm not going to try to make money off of it. I do it for me. So if you get into writing just to make money, if that's your goal, your first goal. I mean, my goal is to make money now, but I got to that point where I knew that my stuff could sell. But your first goal should be to tell stories that you love because you love telling them. And once you get practice to the point where you're a good writer, and you'll know, I'll tell you that you won't have to ask people if you're a good writer. If you're a good enough writer, people will tell you. I guess that's the other point, is when you get to the point where you are a good writer, you're not going to have to ask people. People will come tell you. So if you're not at that point yet, don't get discouraged. Don't make it about money. You're doing something you love, and if you can't make money at it yet, that's fine. Maybe you won't. Maybe this will always be a hobby. But, wildlife photography, my hobby, don't make money at it, but I still love it. I still do it. I still go out to Yellowstone a couple times a year. I go other trips. I just love doing it. So if you love writing, then don't be discouraged by lack of sales or lack of money. Keep doing it, and at some point you're going to get enough better at it that you will make some money. If that's what you want to do with it. Some people don't want to expose themselves to the criticisms, but in my opinion, if you make art and don't show it to anybody, then it's not really art. So I think you need to show it to other people. I think you need to expose it. I just think that you need to, the first few books you have, if they aren't successful, if you put them out there and they're not successful, that is not a reason to be discouraged. So don't throw money at stuff that you don't know that you don't feel is good enough to make money at yet. Wait until you get to the point where you know your work is good enough, then invest either money in marketing it or the time to try to get an agent. Whatever you're going to do with it, that's the time to do that once you get to that point. And that's the great thing I think about self-publishing now, is that you can get to the point where if your aim is to be traditionally published, to get an agent and go to one of the big publishers, you can put your stuff out, self-publish on Amazon, and you can probably recognize when you get to the point where you're good enough for that. where your writing is good enough, and then you can tailor something and aim it directly at the literary market, or the traditionally published market. You can aim it at, because it's a different type of book. You're going to have to write a different type of book to get traditionally published than you are to publish yourself and just make money. But we're getting into territory outside my usual craft advice here, so I'm going to wrap this up, but I will close with if your question is, can I become a good writer? The answer is yes. As long as you've read and tell yourself stories in your head, you can become a good writer. How do you get there? You write. You write and you write, and you write every day. Write something every day until you get to the point where you have become the best writer you can be, or at least close to the best. When you've reached a point where you are as good at that point in your life as you're going to get, then you can, if you want to make this, a money-making operation, then you can start thinking about that. But don't jump the gun. Don't try to make money too early. And I mean, you can do it, like I said, but don't try to make money too early, and then if it doesn't work, get discouraged. Don't let the fact that you haven't had success with your first 3 books discourage you. You get to be a good writer by writing, and if the first 3 or 4 books, even 8 books, 10 books, if they don't get to the point where you like, that doesn't mean you give up. You still write what your heart tells you to write, and at some point you're going to get good enough and write something that speaks to people the way it speaks to you. All right, that's enough for now. I will try to do this more often. You guys have a good one, and I will talk to you later.